Some stories aren't told to impress you. They're told to stay with you. In the quiet of night, when the world slows down, history begins to whisper. Naknenem Dutiang Moro Ikseksa. If you find peace in forgotten tales, then this channel was made for you. Follow along, and let the past tuck you in. Imagine a man small in stature but powerful enough to shake the whole of Europe with his will alone. A man who once made emperors bow, who tore the map of the world apart with nothing but his vision and a sword. A man who was once believed to be invincible. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. But now, imagine him in a dimly lit stone house, a single candle flickering, casting long shadows across his pensive face. He was no longer emperor. In 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, exiled to the tiny island of Elba in the Mediterranean. No more battlefields, no more victories, only memories. Memories. And a dream unfinished. They say, those with great ambition, even when buried beneath the earth, will always find a way to rise again. And so Napoleon did. Less than a year after his exile, he returned to France. No massive army, no blood-soaked rebellion. One man. He stepped ashore, raised his hand, and said, "I am Napoleon. If any among you would shoot your emperor, do so now." No bullets were fired. Instead, the very soldiers sent to arrest him knelt. King Louis the fled. Napoleon didn't seize the throne. France handed it back to him, and Europe trembled. The emperor had returned. And this time there would be no mercy, no retreat, no deals. This time he would fight to the end. But there was one thing Napoleon hadn't foreseen. During his absence, his former enemies had learned one thing: to unite. Britain, Prussia, Austria, Russia, all once humbled by him, now marched together with one goal: to destroy Napoleon. Once and for all, Napoleon knew this time he couldn't afford to lose. A single mistake, and the dream would end forever. So he marched. He wouldn't wait for war to come to Paris. He would strike first. He targeted Belgium, where British and Prussian troops were amassing. Divide them. Defeat them separately. Repeat his legendary victory at Austerlitz. Reclaim glory. Reclaim the world. The Waterloo campaign began, fueled by determination, reputation, and the last dream of an empire. On the night of June 17, 1815, Napoleon's army set camp near a small village called Waterloo. The winds shifted, dark clouds loomed, thunder murmured in the distance, as if fate itself had joined the war. Rain began to fall, not a drizzle, but a relentless storm. And on that field, where the fate of empires now rested, was a sea of cold, heavy mud, waiting for the dawn, waiting for the trumpet. Napoleon did not sleep well that night. Perhaps it was his chronic stomach pain, perhaps the damp cold, or perhaps he knew that tomorrow would be the final battle of his life. That night, the skies over Europe would not rest. Across the fields just south of Brussels, the rain poured relentlessly. The trees swayed and groaned as if whispering omens from a forgotten world. Napoleon took shelter inside a weathered stone farmhouse named La Belle Alliance. It wasn't a palace, but tonight, it was the center of his universe. No celebration, no wine, no triumphant laughter. Only maps spread across a damp wooden table. Only roads that had turned into rivers of mud. Only the anxious eyes of generals waiting, watching him, like children looking for answers in a father's silence. Still, the rain wouldn't stop. Napoleon's grand army, 100,000 strong, huddled beneath leaking tents. The grass had dissolved into sludge, their weapons soaked, their cannons stuck. The wheels groaned as if burdened not just by iron and wood, but by the weight of a nation's hopes. Across the fields, British Commander Wellington was positioned on higher ground. Higher in terrain, perhaps higher in advantage. He didn't rush. He didn't attack. He waited. Waited for the Prussians to arrive. He didn't need to win the battle alone. He just had to endure. Napoleon knew this. He knew that Wellington was stalling for time. For Blücher, the Prussian general, to join him. If Napoleon didn't strike soon, he wouldn't be facing one enemy army. He'd face two. But how could he attack in this storm? And so came the decision. The decision of a man who had once moved faster than thought. A man of lightning war. Now, forced to wait. We'll delay until the ground dries, he said. A delay of only a few hours. But in war, a few hours can rewrite history. A single night of rain, a morning's hesitation, and everything began slipping from his grasp. Napoleon stepped into the rain. He walked past pools of brown water, past the cannons stuck in mire. He saw his soldiers soaked, shivering, yet still watching him, still waiting for his command. These were the same men who had followed him from Egypt to Moscow, from victory to victory, and now to this sodden patch of earth. They didn't complain. They didn't ask questions. They simply trusted. And Napoleon knew that tomorrow, when the trumpets sounded, there would be no retreat. This would be the final gamble, the last turn of the blade. It is said he could not sleep that night. Perhaps his stomach tormented him once more. Perhaps the storm outside disturbed his rest. Or perhaps he felt something deeper, not fear, but a strange quiet, knowing that the dream he had chased his whole life, this was approaching its final dawn. Outside the rain fell harder, like a steady drumbeat. Not from soldiers, but from the sky itself, as if the heavens too had joined the war, a war between man and rain, between strategy and fate, between glory and an ending. At sunrise, the world would awaken. But whether that light would be one of victory or the final flicker of a dying empire, only time would tell. June 18th, 1815. The morning was cloaked in a pale, damp veil. No triumphant sunrise, no golden rays of glory, just mist and the quiet tension of 1,000 soldiers holding their breath. Napoleon stepped out from his tent. He looked skyward. The clouds were still thick, the ground wet, soft, reluctant, the artillery still stuck in the mud. But time was slipping away. He couldn't delay any longer. If he didn't attack now, the Prussians would arrive, and when they did, he'd be trapped between two great armies. He had to strike, even if the ground groaned beneath his boots. At 9 a.m., the order was given. The first cannon fired, a deep, tired roar like the sigh of history itself. The French surged forward, not with the speed of lightning, but through thick mud. They dragged cannons by hand. Horses stumbled. Wheels screamed in protest. Still, they advanced, because he had told them to, because they believed. Across the field, Wellington's forces waited, calm, structured, positioned on firmer ground. They did not charge. They held, and they waited for the Prussians. Napoleon's first move was to strike Hougoumont Farm, a stronghold, a distraction. He hoped it would draw British forces away from the center, but Hougoumont held firm. Wellington had anticipated the ploy, and the rain, the same rain that soaked the ground, had made it impossible to burn the farm. Buildings, a key part of Napoleon's plan. The weather had interfered again. By noon, Napoleon launched a major attack on the British center. He hoped to break their line before help arrived. French cannons thundered despite the mud. Cavalry charged through the sludge. Cries rang out. Steel clashed. It was chaos. But the ground was not on their side. The horses, heavy with armor, sank. Men slipped. Cannons misfired. Everything felt slower, heavier, wrong. Wellington remained patient. He'd seen war before in India and Spain. He knew that time could defeat genius. He let the French come, wave after wave. And then, from the woods in the distance, shadows moved. The Prussians had arrived. Napoleon saw them, and he knew he was now fighting two enemies at once. He gave one final command. His last reserve, the Imperial Guard, the men who had never failed, the symbol of French glory, La Garde avance. The Guard marches. And they did, with pride, with honor, with desperation. But then, they too broke. For the first time, the Imperial Guard retreated. The field fell silent. Then, it collapsed. The French began to run. No orders, no formation, just fleeing. The dream was unraveling. Napoleon watched it fall apart. The flags, the men, the hope, all sinking into the same mud that had slowed his cannons that morning. Evening crept over Waterloo. The sun, if it could still be called that, hung low, a dull smudge behind the gray. The battle had raged for hours, and now, the final act began. From a small ridge, Napoleon looked out. What he saw wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a graveyard in waiting. French flags fallen, cannons abandoned, the Imperial Guard gone, scattered, broken, silenced. His once proud army, the mightiest in Europe, was now a blur. Panicked men running through wet fields, leaving behind their brothers, their rifles, their dreams. Wellington did not pursue. He stood quietly watching the collapse. Perhaps he pitied Napoleon. Perhaps he respected him. Or perhaps, he simply knew the war was already over. Napoleon did not scream, did not curse, did not cry. He stood mud to his knees, watching a world he built dissolve beneath his feet. Some say he looked down at his boots caked in mud and whispered something to himself. No one heard it clearly. Was it regret? A curso? A farewell. General Cambronne of the old Guard was surrounded. When asked to surrender, he famously replied, La Garde meurt, mais ne se rend pas. The Guard dies, but never surrenders. A phrase that echoed louder than any cannon that day. But the Guard died, and Napoleon lived. And sometimes survival is the cruelest fate. He left the field in silence. No cheers, no anthem, no hope, just footsteps in the mud. Back in Paris, they didn't believe it at first. How could he lose? How could Napoleon, the man who rewrote history with his hands, be undone by an Englishman and a rainstorm? But it was true, and this time there would be no escape, no Elba, no return. On June 22nd, 1815, Napoleon abdicated for the second time. He didn't fight it, didn't beg. He simply stepped down, like a man who had seen the final page of a book he once authored. He was sent to St. Helena, a lonely, wind-battered island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Far from France, far from glory, far from everything, there he wrote, and remembered, and wandered. They say on rainy days he would stand by the window for hours watching the sea, saying nothing. Perhaps he was back on the field. Perhaps in his mind he could still hear the thunder of cannons, feel the range, smell the gunpowder. Sometimes the end isn't death. Sometimes it's living on with memories you can't undo. After Waterloo, there was no more war, only silence. A silence so deep, so heavy, it drowned out even the memory of cannon fire. Across the muddy fields, bodies lay motionless, soldiers from every side, faces still frozen in final gasps, hands clenched around broken weapons. Some died standing. Some died holding each other. But all became part of the same earth. French flags lay torn in the mud. Boots abandoned, hats trampled. What was once glory was now just debris. The living crawled through the dead, calling for help, whispering names. But no one came. In Brussels, the people cheered victory. Banners waved. Music filled the streets. But they did not see the land just miles away now, a continent of grief. Wellington, though victorious, wrote in his report, "The next worst thing to a battle lost is a battle won." And he meant it. Napoleon left the battlefield in the night. No speeches, no final charge, no last stand. Just a man on a horse riding away from a place where his empire died. In Paris. Disbelief. Many thought it a lie. How could Napoleon lose? How could the man who had once redrawn the world be defeated by weather and time? But it was real. And this time, France would not fight for him again. On June 22nd, he abdicated again. This time, no triumphant escape, no waiting army. This time he was just a man with no throne, no sword, no path forward. They sent him to St. Helena, an island forgotten by the world, a place where wind and waves never stop, and the sky stretches forever, but never answers. There Napoleon lived out his final years, not as a general, not as an emperor, but as a ghost. He wrote he remembered he stared into the horizon for hours, and when it rained, he stood quietly by the window, always the same place. Always the same look in his eyes. Maybe he saw Waterloo again. The mud, the thunder, the flags falling. Maybe he saw that morning when he said, "Wait for the ground to dry." And maybe he asked himself every day until the end, what if it hadn't rained? Simple question. But one that has echoed through 2 centuries of history. A single night of weather. A morning of mud. Could it have changed everything if the skies had stayed dry? Napoleon's cannons might have rolled out on time. The horses would not have slipped. The artillery would have struck harder sooner. The Imperial Guard might have marched through dry fields instead of swamps. He wouldn't have delayed his attack. Wouldn't have waited for the sun. Wouldn't have given the Prussians time to arrive. Wellington could have been crushed, retreating back to the coast. Prussia scattered confused too late. And Napoleon might have stood once more as the unchallenged ruler of Europe. No exile, no St. Helena, no final surrender, just the emperor victorious again. And then what he might not have invaded Britain. He didn't need to. One great victory could have brought Europe to the table. A new peace negotiated with Napoleon's terms. Not defeat, but diplomacy. A different Europe. One where France remained the dominant empire. Where Paris, not London, became the engine of industrial power. Where monarchs respected or feared one man's will. And what about us? The future we live in now, would the 20th century still happen the way it did? Would World War I have erupted without the fractured, bitter alliances Napoleon's fall left behind? Would Hitler ever rise in a world where French unity never collapsed? Would er? Here. Different rulers he go, folks under different struggles. All of it, just maybe different because of a field, because of a storm, because of a decision to wait until the ground was dry. It seems absurd that history could hinge on the weather, but it does, it always has. Napoleon once said, "Had I died at Waterloo, I would have been a legend, but I lived and became a lesson." And maybe that's what he truly became. A reminder that no empire lasts forever, that no genius can master chance, that sometimes a single rainstorm can wash away a dream. Piano fades into silence. A final image, a battlefield washed in mist. One man walking alone, disappearing slowly into the fog of history. If this story stirred something in you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe Napoleon lost to the rain or to fate? And if you enjoy soft stories of the past, subscribe and let history tuck you in each night.